Welcome back to another live show. I'm your host, Emily Bose, and I'm really excited to be joined by Dan Sloat to talk about all things drones, aerospace, all kinds of exciting things today. So, Dan, thanks so much for being on the show with me.
Emily, I appreciate it. It's an honor.
Thank you. So, I know you've got a really interesting, diverse background. You were in the Air Force, you've been a pilot, you've done things with drones and unmanned aircraft, and now you're working across, academia, different industries, communities with leaders, really shaping the future of transportation. And I think working on more of like the policy side and how a lot of these changes are being implemented. Can you tell me just a little bit more about what that looks like, and what is the vision that keeps you pushing the boundaries in aviation with your work?
Absolutely. So there's just been a plethora of new momentum, regulatory changes as it relates to uncrewed aerial systems and this greater sector we know as advanced air mobility. Most notably, the draft rule for Part 108 that covers beyond visual line of sight drone operations. That's something that myself and a lot of our industry colleagues, to include your brother David, I'm certain, we've been looking forward to this for quite some time.
Okay.
Any chance I get, I always encourage people to show grace to our civil aviation authorities and regulators. The FAA has quite a bit on their hands as far as trying to safely integrate a variety of new technologies into our national airspace system in a way that upholds safety, but also doesn't squelch innovation. And that has to be an incredibly difficult balance to strike. Part 108 is certainly an exciting element of that. When it comes to commercial delivery, if a pilot has to maintain visual through the entire operation, it does kind of beg the question, why not just drive the rest of the way?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is going to open a lot of doors and many other use cases. But there's also been exciting developments with a rule known as Mosaic, kind of expanding definitions for light sport aircraft. We, of course, also had a big push from the president's office with an executive order there in June regarding a big push to further invest in drone manufacturing. So, and that certainly has implications for electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, eVTOLs.
Okay.
So there's so much taking place right now in the United States, but also around the world.
Lots of really exciting changes. For folks that aren't super extensively invested in the drone space, just to make sure that I understand. So I know in the past, the rules have been you can't fly a drone outside of what you can visually see. That's what you're talking about with like visual line of sight. So if you're trying to deliver a package from, Walmart to someone's home, you have to be able to visibly watch the drone the whole way, or have someone stationed along the route that's watching it and has eyes on it the whole time in order to be able to actually complete that, which obviously creates significant limits. So that barrier is being removed, or there's regulation being put in place to allow some of those barriers to be removed for like longer trips, essentially, on the commercial side. Obviously the military and other folks are flying drones further, but on the commercial side of things. Is that right?
That's exactly right, Emily. And in fact, importantly, that visual line of sight cannot be aided beyond, simple corrective lenses, for example.
So you can't be watching through like a telescopic lens or something.
Or binoculars.
Right.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay, so that's being opened up, which obviously opens up tremendous opportunity. which is exciting. But then I'm sure a host of other challenges with tracking and identifying and things. It's interesting too, because I would think most folks that haven't been exposed much to the drone space think of drones as like the little tiny things that, you know, you can like fly around with a little remote control. And like, I've seen some drones that are, you know, the size of a car. I mean, that are being used for some of the package delivery and stuff like that. I mean, they can be massive. I'm sure you've seen much more than that, but I'm not really, you know, heavily in the space. So it was really eye-opening to me to see just how big some of these things that are for commercial use are, and how substantial you could see, or how, you know, scary or potentially damaging it would be if one of those things, you know, landed in the wrong place, or, you know, took out some power lines or something else, because they're not like tiny little drones. These are pretty significantly sized vehicles. And then I'm sure there's other applications outside of package delivery. Obviously, there's much more you can do. What are some of the things that, you know, for people that might not be as familiar or might not really understand what all of that means, for our daily lives? Like, we're talking about one example, right? Package delivery, but, you know, you could think about things I could imagine, like organ transplant, where, you know, you're doing the surgery in a hospital on one spot and you want to like really quickly transport it somewhere else without having to take the time to like take all the logistical steps. You know, you could see like a number of different situations like that where you could potentially really save someone's life, or you know, create significant efficiency. What are some other things that you wish people understood or knew about this, and the impact to positively impact our daily lives that maybe not everyone's aware of yet?
Yes, the organ transport use case is especially close to my heart. I'm just realizing how ironic it is to say that. But
I didn't think about it like that.
Yeah, but it's a case where you know, the current maturity level for electric batteries is such that payload is a significant limiting factor. I remember reading a report saying that that at least for some models, you know, 1.2 passengers was the ideal. And of course, you know, that's easy to laugh off. You know, what's the value of you know, 0.2 of a person? But
Right.
that is precisely an organ, right?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So a qualified pilot and a bit more. And so I think there is a lot of potential to improve the efficiency and importantly, the speed of which we can deliver certain goods, but also a number of medical equipment or prescription drugs, especially to more remote communities where even overland becomes quite burdensome. Perhaps their terrain variation that makes the route, you know, particularly winding. Or maybe there are large bodies of water that create further delays.
Right. Or even disasters, like thinking about North Carolina. I had friends who were part of helping with the rescue efforts there after the flooding and stuff. And they're like, entire roads are washed out, and we're having to hike in pacemakers and, you know, things that people urgently need for their health. And if you could drop that in with a drone, I mean, that would be massive.
Well,
in Texas, you know, with the floods.
That's exactly right. And of course, the first use case is making sure that we have drones positioned kind of as the eye in the sky in the wake of natural disasters, just to have that situational awareness for incident commanders, whether it's FEMA at the national level or at the state level, just to have a clear understanding, exactly like you're describing, Emily, where are the road closures, right? And what is still available.
Or even search and rescue, or, you know, some of those scenarios too, I would think.
search and rescue coupled with thermal imaging is truly a game changer.
Oh, yeah.
Just how much faster they're able to recover missing individuals. So we're strong proponents of that at the Advanced Mobility Institute. But there are, but also the direct intervention, right? Wildfire suppression. Society asks quite a bit of firefighting pilots, and they very much put their lives directly in danger with how unpredictable wildfires can be. So the extent that we can use uncrewed systems to directly combat natural disasters like that, those can certainly save lives in their own right. And what's interesting about it is when we think of public safety, it's often kind of in the lens of, okay, there are people in danger who we want to recover, rescue in some way. But it is very much the case that the individuals involved in recovering those victims, there are lives lost, and that's the nature of the work. But it doesn't have to be that way, and it's really exciting to be involved in this new sector where there's going to come a point in time where those decisions become remarkably easy, because then it's just money, right? If we lose a vehicle in pursuit of saving members of community, it's just money.
Right. No, that totally makes sense. And I know, I live in Norfolk, Virginia, where we occasionally have hurricanes, or, the Outer Banks or different places near us get hit. And so often they've done a much better job in the last few years of putting out, flood maps and different areas and trying to evacuate people and saying, hey, get out of here, because if you don't leave, it's not just your life you're putting in danger, you're putting first responders' lives in danger that then have to go out and search for you and rescue you. And so even to your point, being able to send out some sort of unmanned vehicle or something to aid in those efforts, or maybe multiple, could really make a huge difference in sparing the first responders, or even helping them just know exactly where to go. Rather than having to search a really wide area to find the person, just tell them, hey, they're right there. Right. We've got an eye on them. Go pick them up right there. And, making everybody's lives a lot safer. So that's really interesting to think about. I'm sure, if you're listening to the news, I feel like a lot of the mentions of drones right now are more in like warfare related things or other things. Like they're just so much more prevalent in culture, but you don't always hear or think about the more positive uses of it. So I'm glad to hear and kind of help people be thinking about that. I know I've seen, having worked in manufacturing, recruiting, or things for manufacturing in the past, a lot of the technological changes that happen will be something that helps make someone's job safer, helps make their life, their life better, their work easier, where you're like, hey, rather than a human having to like tip this bowl of molten metal over, we got a robot to do that now, And so it's always good when you can see those technological changes helping just make people's jobs safer and their lives better. So I know you're really involved, obviously, in the policy side. You're working, globally, but you're also working with things here in the U.S. What would you say, coming from kind of your Air Force background, anything from your Air Force career that you learned that you've really taken with you into how you're shaping the policy? I know you were talking about safety. I saw even, looking on your site that like dignity and resilience and some of those things are a big part of your mission as well. How is your background and your experience really shaping the way you're pursuing those policies now?
Well, of course, my time on active duty was my first touch point with UAS systems. I served a little over 6 years in a capacity that is effectively UAS traffic management. My career field is known as air battle management.
Okay.
And it's very much kind of taking like a broad view of the area of operations, and always maintaining a clear sense of where all of our available resources and assets are. And when you have that level of situational awareness, it really is incredible how much you can reduce this idea, this concept we call fog of war. Right? You got bullets whizzing over your head very quickly. What you feel confident, as far as the state of things shrinks dramatically.
Okay.
You lose visual on what's ahead, perhaps what's behind. And so a lot of the drive, kind of the catalyst behind launching the Advanced Air Mobility Institute, couples my military experience with uncrewed aero systems with the immediate follow-on, having attended law school. And so it was an opportunity, kind of taking that forward and understanding just the incredible impact that this technology would have on our laws and regulations, because these are very powerful tools. And what we see time and time again, lawmakers really need to have a clear understanding of the full extent of capabilities of a given tool, whether that's aviation or otherwise, so that they can appropriately and hopefully proactively mitigate the misuse or abuse of those tools. Right. To the extent we can. Bad actors are always very creative and find ingenious uses to gain some advantage. Unfortunately, sometimes not even advantage, just to harm people, right? Just to watch the world burn.
Right.
And so it's incumbent upon lawmakers, to the extent possible, to reach out to subject matter experts to get a sense of, okay, what are all the ways that this can cause harm, and what perhaps economic incentives we can put in place to encourage people to engage in positive behavior. At the same time, what are some legal means we have to discourage potentially harmful behavior. So it's really been fascinating, because I did also study economics as well.
Okay.
So I kind of very naturally think about the full spectrum of incentives, and so part of what's fascinating to me is I'm certain that the younger generation will come forward and think of yet other use cases that we haven't even considered yet.
Right. No, absolutely. And it's interesting. I mean, you really have such a diverse background. So the voice and the perspective that you bring to this really is fascinating. And like you were saying, thinking through the full spectrum of impacts that this will have makes a lot of sense. Is there anything that you can think of, or a moment? Because a lot of folks that are in kind of my network, or that I've worked with, are veterans, and I know a lot of people are interested in drones and the drone space. Can you think of any moments, or can you share a story with us where you've seen collaboration between veterans, or a veteran perspective, and civilian efforts create like a breakthrough in the industry, or help open up something new that was exciting, just for people that are interested, in learning more, that to be encouraged by or excited by?
Well, of course, military and technology have had a fascinating relationship, as far back as recorded history, trying to, in particular, understand, again, how can these tools provide an advantage on the battlefield. And so many technologies do pursue dual use. try to capture a bit of DoD research funding to be able to reach commercialization. I would say that something that pursuing a route like that makes abundantly clear that anytime a tool can provide kind of that next level of intelligence, we'll always have, right? And that's what I'm particularly passionate about, is really doing what I can to try to encourage individuals, but perhaps especially military veterans, because we have that we have many of those shared values, wanting to work in a space that's much bigger than ourselves, and
Right.
and saving lives is at that core. I'll give a shout out to colleagues in North Carolina with a program called Vets to Drones, finding opportunities for military veterans to get the necessary training to Part 107, to earn their commercial drone license, so that they can find civilian pathways to still hopefully contribute to their respective community, especially in life-saving missions after their time in service. So I would certainly say drones' capacity to increase intelligence has tremendous implications in the military context. But if we bring that over to stateside missions for public safety, get them in the hands of first responders, and of course, first responder corps enjoys quite an extent of former military individuals. There's a lot of crossover and mutual respect among those groups, and that's always been fantastic to see. So we're trying to encourage as much of that as we can through education and advocacy.
That's awesome. I know you've worked on policy and different things, like we were saying, both here at home and globally. Can you think of, a story or an example of something that you've seen of either just an exciting breakthrough, or where someone, was using this technology for something that just you found either really exciting or really innovative? What have you seen lately that got you just, really excited about the way people are using this tech?
That's an excellent question. I of course, what's so timely with this Part 108 beyond visual line of sight, as you alluded to, Emily, it's, in the military, our drone pilots, they're often back in Nevada, right? Operating these vehicles. We're much closer to the battle space as controllers. But just the sheer use of communications to provide that real-time feedback, that's been pretty incredible. So I have the utmost confidence that the technology is there for safe and effective beyond visual line of sight operations. Truth be told, I can't think of like a specific kind of an aha moment where perhaps I saw a use in the military.
No, I mean on the civilian side, like what you've seen since you've been out and kind of working through these policy things, like how are people using it out in the commercial space that you've found really exciting, not necessarily in the military space?
Oh, I see. Okay. So I do want to acknowledge in the agriculture space, I feel like there tends to be kind of this very ignorant kind of assumption, perhaps especially among, city slickers, if you will, to just kind of altogether assume, okay, if you work in agriculture, right, your job's on a farm, you're probably highly conservative, not necessarily in the sense of politics, but generally being opposed to change,
Not very tech savvy.
Not, yeah, anything but tech savvy, right? Very old fashioned. But this is very much playing out in the emerging aviation tech space. But it's true in a lot of different industries. Agriculture are actually among some of the very first adopters across a number of different technologies.
Interesting.
Because they understand, right? Time is money. If there is a tool that becomes available that can make the work that I do faster, fewer errors, more affordable over the long term, give it a shot, right?
Right.
They're often very quick to say, listen, this has to get done, and our current process, results, such and such crop yield. But if there's a way that we can do that, even more efficiently, let's give it a shot. And so we've been seeing quite a few innovative uses of drones, whether that's precision seeding, or identifying invasive species. Certainly when it comes to irrigation, watering of crops, or the spraying of pesticides, if you can be much more targeted in each of those, not only are things cheaper, but they're in fact safer and better for the environment as well.
That makes sense. That is super interesting. And you're right. I think people do certainly have misconceptions around agriculture or ranching or some of those. But week before last, I was talking to Albert Bellamy on the show, who's another veteran who's big in the data space. And he does classes for folks wanting to transition into data analytics. And he was talking about having a couple of farmers in his classes and how data oriented farmers have to be, because you're dealing with, like square acres and, yield per acre and how much seed and how much water and how much pesticides. And, you have to have labor and you have technology involved. And there's so much that goes into all of that. And their margins are honestly like extremely slim. So they have to be really mindful about how they manage all of that data, how they, manage all of the different pieces that go into it. It's quite extensive. And definitely requires a very high level of intelligence. So that makes a lot of sense that they would be using drones or other unmanned technology to try to do that better. That's super interesting. We've seen a little bit more things like drone shows, or where people are doing coordinated, like big groups of drones to do more artistic things, I guess you could say, where they're kind of doing light shows or using, really large, really highly coordinated groups of drones to do certain things. What have you seen with that that's been interesting, that just kind of any interesting use cases of just using large coordinated groups of drones versus like one doing an individual mission?
Yes, the drone light shows have been a really, I think, fun use. Certainly much more engaging for for children. It's kind of course, a new parallel with fireworks.
Right.
I had the fortune to be invited down to Columbia's annual air show. And they had a particularly impressive display. I personally love to see kind of that fusion, this idea of STEAM, right? Science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And in its capacity, right? That art doesn't have to be this kind of messy, abstract, altogether opposite to engineering. In fact, we see throughout history, of course, Leonardo da Vinci being among the foremost as a polymath, created some of the world's most beautiful masterpieces with a heavy integration of mathematic principles.
Mm.
And so that's really kind of fascinating to see it play out with drones, that we can actually, instead of just providing military intelligence and combat capabilities, to, as you said, more efficient agricultural operations, but also things that can spur and evoke emotions in people, right? Through beautiful visual displays.
Yeah.
So that's been really exciting to see.
That is exciting. My husband this week was watching some really incredible drone footage of like whale watching, where the people are in the boat, but because they had a drone, you can see the size and scale of this whale that's just like going right underneath their boat. And if you're on the boat, or you're even like videoing or photographing from the boat, you're not going to be able to get that perspective. But being, however many feet up in the air, you could really see the scale and the majesty of these whales. It was incredible. And we really haven't had too many opportunities. I mean, I suppose if you're photographing from a helicopter, maybe you'd be possibly in a similar range, but you can just do so much or see so many things you just otherwise wouldn't have seen at all. And it was just beautiful and awe-inspiring. So that was really cool to see. And I did think about that. I was like, what a cool application of a drone, to be able to show these like incredible creatures from an angle we just otherwise would never see.
Yeah, absolutely. I very much hope that it continues to be adopted and integrated into classroom learning. I think it has a lot of potential to help, inspire students to not only make use of those particular technologies, but also to dream even bigger and come up with new tools of their own.
Yeah, absolutely. So last question for you as we wrap. So I think we're talking about a lot of interesting applications and things with drones and some of these unmanned vehicles. What do you see as the opportunities for people who are interested in this space, opening up where people are going to, let me rephrase this. Anytime there's a change in technology, there's always new types of jobs, new types of occupations or careers that didn't exist before that, get opened up as you open a new frontier. So what are some of the things you've seen that people might not even be thinking of? So obviously we've talked about drone pilots or operators being one. But what are some other things, other avenues that people who may be interested in the drone space or, this kind of unmanned aviation space, but wouldn't necessarily know, oh, my skills could actually translate to that, or I might actually be able to work in the broader space, even if I'm not necessarily someone that wants to fly a drone, but I want to support the industry. Especially for folks, I'm focusing a lot of the conversation on the show around kind of that skilled workforce where, maybe you're bringing some more tangible or hands-on skills to the table. What do you see for folks like that want to support the industry and maybe want to bring, the skills or assets they have already to the table without like going back to school to, study it or something like that? What are some of the opportunities opening up?
Yes. So there's loads of highly transferable skills. Anyone who's drawn to roles where there's a bit of tinkering and fixing. As we scale this space up dramatically, we will need an awful lot of skilled maintenance and service technicians. So of course, anyone who works on vehicles, whether those be cars or maritime vessels, those will be highly transferable. The electric charging, I think, will continue to grow quite dramatically. But there's also, as we look at kind of reinventing air traffic control. That's there's almost a bit of kind of I would say orchestration as the volumes increase dramatically. So not only do we need to invest in new radar systems, all of the sensors that can track these appropriately, but we also need individuals who can think at a high level how to keep these safely deconflicted. We want to put as much of that on the edge in vehicle-to-vehicle communications, right? So they can be, they're nearest to the parallel of where the rubber meets the pavement. So if they can be communicating their respective speed and trajectory, direction, and so forth, we have a better chance of safety in that sense. But I do fully expect that we will see kind of a new paradigm in air traffic control. In particular, I do think that my military career field as air battle managers are particularly well suited. Our skill set matches that quite closely. So certainly any of your listeners, who come from a weapons director or air battle management background, there's a space for you in this advanced air mobility sector. But there are so many. I mean, supply chain. Anyone with a supply chain background, your skills are going to be enormously beneficial. Architects, they're while we're working on the digital infrastructure, of course, we need to keep an eye towards as much as possible seamlessly integrating the physical landing infrastructure. As you mentioned, some drones are quite large, and the passenger carrying variants, these eVTOL aircraft, we will need to make sure that they are that they can do this work in an affordable way, but also while we're at it, let's make sure that they're designed to contemplate persons with limited mobility from the outset. Right? I mean, it's unfortunate, but every mode of transportation thus far, individuals in wheelchairs, for example, were always kind of an afterthought. And so anyone who has an understanding of those human factors, their skills can be enormously beneficial.
Absolutely.
So there's so many different factors. This advanced air mobility space is going to touch upon many different facets of life and society. I for our members at the AM Institute, in that initial meeting, I often tell them, please let's try to stump me with a given skill set and how it might be applied to this space, because it's going to require quite a diverse population to get this off the ground.
Absolutely. No, that's super interesting. And you're right. It's absolutely that mobility or disability accommodation aspect is the last thought of. I was not at all the same, but you are a dad. I have a toddler with a stroller, and I was at our botanic gardens last week, and they just created all of this huge new parking lot with all of these sidewalks interconnecting, and the old ones have ramps on and off and the new ones don't. And I was like, what are you guys doing? what why? It's hard as someone with a stroller, and I have very capable legs, and I can't imagine how frustrating it would be for someone in a wheelchair or who has any other sort of mobility issues. And so it's easy to not think about those things if you don't need them, but they're super important. And I saw a video the other day where someone who's kind of a disability advocate highlighted all of these different things in our lives, like sidewalk ramps being like a minimum, but so many different things that we all enjoy and experience, like subtitles on movies and all kinds of other things that we don't even realize are there as an accommodation for folks with disabilities that the rest of us just enjoy and utilize. So it is super important to be thinking about those things from the outset. I did want to ask you before we jump off, I saw a flyer on your LinkedIn feed about the Pulitzer Electric Aircraft Race. So tell me about that, because that looked really interesting. What is it, and how can we find out more about it?
Yes, certainly. So the Pulitzer Electric Aircraft Race, this is an effort really to kind of draw a page from the history books. Back in 1920, the National Aeronautics Association was making an effort to increase public awareness and achieve public acceptance for aviation itself. 1920, put yourself in the shoes of an average American. They're still riding horses. They perhaps heard of Henry Ford up in Detroit and the idea of an automobile, but never seen one in their, with their own eyes, let alone ridden in one. So, when rumors started going around about flying machines, a lot of people said, absolutely not,
Right.
That can't possibly be true.
I'd never get in something like that.
Exactly. Even if it was possible, I don't want to be a guinea pig. Right. And so we now in this new era of electric aviation, it's not so much that we have concerns that people don't believe that aviation is possible, but perhaps some reservations about electric propulsion, fully electric propulsion. We understand the parallel with electric cars, and this idea of range anxiety has developed. With a car, you are benefited, of course, knowing that even if you were to run out of battery, you just kind of pull to the shoulder and probably be expensive, but you could get some kind of charging vehicle to come get you back up to speed. It's a different story with aviation.
Right. If you're in the air, you can't really pull over if you run out of juice.
Exactly. So, but the truth is, pilots have always been expected and required to have an ever-present awareness of their fuel on board, right? It's never
totally
been.
Makes sense.
Yeah, there was never a time where you could be cavalier about your reserves in an aircraft like people are with cars. Of course, there's a different threshold too. We require so much more of our pilots.
Right. You probably shouldn't be cavalier about it with cars either. Just say.
You shouldn't be. Yeah, of course I agree. But with this new era of electric aviation, in much the same way, to try to capitalize on that concept of seeing is believing, we thought, let's revive it. Let's bring back the Pulitzer Trophy. And what's so exciting is that our Advanced Air Mobility Institute, we were able to negotiate with the fine folks at the NAA for the naming rights. And so,
awesome.
Yes. So coming up now 60 days, October 12th is precisely to the day 100 years since the last running of the original race series.
Wow.
So there's something cool. So up at the Springfield Beckley Airport in Ohio, that's the home of the National AAM Center of Excellence. We will be bringing this race series back. And the requirements, very simple, straightforward. It does need to be all electric, heavier than air, crewed. So I know, of course, we've been talking an awful lot about drones.
Interesting. Okay.
But this race will require a human pilot on board. So there's only one type certified aircraft available in the United States today, the Pipistrel Velis Electro, a fixed-wing eCTOL, electric conventional takeoff and landing vehicle. which is now owned by Textron. But for the purpose of our race, because it's not a commercial endeavor, no money's being exchanged. They don't need to be type certified. They simply need to have received an airworthiness certification from the FAA. And so, we'll come out in October. We're hoping for some nice weather, of course, to reach that centennial. And they'll fly around a 30 nautical mile triangular course, 2 laps, a total of 60 nautical miles. That's perfect for the Velis Electro. So absolutely, any of your listeners who perhaps own a Velis Electro or know someone who does, we would really appreciate if you give them a tap on the shoulder, encourage them to look into this, because one of the most exciting things about this, Emily, is if you have the fastest time, this is a chance to get your name in the Smithsonian.
Oh, wow. That is so cool.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. And then do you think that you may have some interesting alternative inventor aircraft joining because of that requirement that they don't have to be type certified? Because you could get some pretty interesting things coming out there joining the race if that's the case.
Well, that is true. And
you're like, not sure, maybe.
Well, we have, we always want to keep safety at the forefront.
Of course.
And so, but that's the nature of an airworthiness certificate, right? That the right people have, taken a close look at this contraption that you're describing. But we absolutely want to encourage, those innovators. Ultralight category, if it's fully electric, would certainly be welcome. Naturally, there are some fairly stringent weight restrictions, as well as speed restrictions, which it's hard to engage and seriously compete in a speed race if you have legal restrictions on the speed that you can go.
Right.
That doesn't make it as exciting, but of course, we have all these rules again in the interest of safety. But our hope our hope very much is that I think there's a deeper message there, that even for an aircraft whose specs maybe are substantially lower, that the horsepower just doesn't compare with the rest of the field, that there's this notion and opportunity of sportsmanship that we can help to instill in the younger generation, to say it really is, we shouldn't only pursue competitions and races and so forth, only if we have a high expectation of winning. And that's another lesson that we do hope to instill through this race series, for kids who come out and watch this. Sometimes it's just incredible to be part of something historic like this inaugural Pulitzer electric aircraft race.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, thank you so much for taking the time today. This was a really interesting conversation, and I'll be sure to share some links to your website, and we tagged you obviously in the event, so anyone who's interested in getting in touch with you or learning more about the race can find all of that, I'm sure, on your LinkedIn. I'll try to share some of those links on the event as well, but really appreciate your time and all of your insights and the work that you're doing, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily.